Laura-Rose, it is fabulous to have you here this evening. For everyone watching, I'm Tracey Sainsbury, fertility counsellor and host of IVF Life Stories. We're here today with Laura-Rose, bit of a legend, really.
No.
I'm trying to think where to start, because I feel like I've been talking about you, never mind with you, for so many years. We're at one of the clinics I work with. We used to host, they were called in seminars for same-sex couples having treatment, and it was Two Mummies Tribe that used to be mentioned the whole time. But it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When we invite people on to IVF Life Stories, we know you're legendary. But we want to know more about you and your journey and your pathway to parenthood and where your passion for fertility started. So when did you first think about your own fertility and thinking about becoming a mum? Can you remember back what age you were?
I think, well, I always wanted to have children. Obviously didn't come out as queer until I was pretty much nearly 21, when I finally came out. Um, but always the thought of having children just seemed something that was just so not accessible, something that was so unknown and whether it would even happen. And of course knew about adoption and fostering, etc. But when it came to my wife and I've been together 18 years, married 15 and civil partnered. But when we first met, I said, I desperately want children. And she felt the same. And so when it came to talking about kids, there was no information, no support space, no community of people in our community having children back at that time. You're talking like 14 odd years ago. It's not, it doesn't seem that long ago, Tracy, but it was. And so we looked at the NHS to see, do we get fertility funding? And our CCG at the time, local ICB now, there was no access for female same-sex couples or anyone queer. So we knew that was a no-go. And we both had a desire to have the opportunity to carry a pregnancy and have a baby. So we wanted to go down that pathway. That felt right for us. And we wanted the legal protections by going through a clinic. So knowing that we'd have to self-fund and pay privately. So we looked around and we found our clinic. So we used CRGH back when they were back at near Holborn, near the dental hospital. And we went to a few clinics, we listened to them, and when we went there, we just said, we don't know where to start genuinely. And they said, look, we may get it wrong, we may make mistakes, but this is a safe space for you and we want to support you. And they talked us through what was viable. And back then, even though we both worked full time and really hard, IVF was just so unaffordable, it wasn't financially viable. So we looked at IUI. But I was desperate to be pregnant, really wanted to be pregnant. And my wife had been told at 15, alone in a GP surgery, you'll never get pregnant. You have severe PCOS. You'll never carry a pregnancy to term. You'll never have a live birth. And she was kind of like, at 15, alone, told you'll never have a child. And she was like, oh, okay, a lot to digest. And she kind of put that back in her mind and said, okay, well, it is what it is. And then obviously when we got to that point of looking to start a family, she questioned that. And I said, well, I wanted to push boundaries and say, well, is that still the case? And they knew a little bit more about PCOS then. And they said, it's going to be difficult to get you pregnant, but it may take a few tries, but we can get there. But just be aware that we want to manage your expectations. So she's 4 years older than me. So we said, look, we both want the opportunity to carry. Let's look at you first. So she went down the IUI route. And yeah, really incredibly scary. We didn't know anyone else in the community that was having children, and really like isolating and disconcerting. And just you felt quite isolated in regards to no one in the community understood what we were going through. Our families didn't. And no one really knew what language to use, what to ask, who was the real mum, all of that kind of stuff. And we had 3 failed attempts at IUI. And then on the 4th, she got pregnant. And we were just absolutely ecstatic. But of course, so many people have miscarriages, and she miscarried. We lost the baby at the end of the first trimester. And she just said, I need to take a pause, psychologically, physically, this is hard. So we took like a 3-month pause just for her to get back, and both psychologically to just take that time, take stock. And then she said, I think if we go again, this could be the last time we'll have to move to you trying. And of course, for her, I didn't want that either because she wanted that opportunity desperately. And then on the fifth attempt, we had our daughter. So our eldest is now 11 in May.
Oh,
Just seems so long ago. It's mad. So at that point, you know, we had this amazing miracle baby. The birth was really great. A lot of healthcare professionals didn't know how to support us, but we had some great experiences and also some really awful discriminatory experiences. And then a few years later, after absolutely no sleep, because she wasn't a sleeper, and just exhaustion, we decided, you know, we'd look to start again, but with me carrying. So we went back to the clinic. We had the same sperm donor from an American sperm bank. We used iTech for our sperm donor, and they were brilliant as well. And when we went down that path, I was like, I knew all the stats. I had all the, you know, I was such a loser with it. I had spreadsheets, I had statistics, I had all the research, all the things.
I think that's been a project manager.
Yeah, no, but kind of you get sometimes crazy in that mode of making sure you know all the things. I wanted to manage my own expectations because we'd lost a baby. So in my head, I was like, it's going to take me at least 5 to 6 attempts. It's not going to happen. I could miscarry. All these kind of really negative connotations and thoughts. And then I went for first cycle IUI failed. I fell on the second cycle. Natural, no medication with IUI. So we were like, wow. And I made the assumption that I was incredibly fertile. I was like, wow, I'm really fertile. That's amazing. We caught that ovulation window. And then we had our son, who is now, he's just turned 7 and was a sleeper, luckily. And then we're both from really big families, Tracey. So my mum's one of 9, my dad was one of 13, then one of 9. And my wife, she's one of 4 anyway, but her side, her dad's one of 4 and her mum was one of 8. So we're from really big, noisy, yeah, crazy families. So we want that cacophony of noise and like family and happiness around us. So we looked to go again, and we had sperm vials saved and made the silly assumption, against all of the work we do, all of the knowledge we have and experience and supporting people, you know, I fell pretty easy last time. I'm really young. I'm, you know, only 33, 34. It's going to happen. And so we went back to the clinic and the consultant said, you know, be mindful. It doesn't always work that way. Just again, managing expectations. And I had 3 failed IUIs just pre-pandemic and was like, what am I doing? I'm eating the right things. I'm drinking the right things. I'm taking the supplements. I'm doing all the things, ticking all those boxes, and it's not working. And of course, really frustrating, even though, you know, incredibly lucky to have 2 children, we still wanted to extend our family. So at that point, we went for further testing to find out that my ovarian reserve had diminished by half. So I was 34, didn't smoke, don't drink, exercise, eat well, no reason. They couldn't find a reason for it. And unexplained secondary infertility is so difficult because you're looking for the blame game consistently, you know, always finding out, what did I do wrong? Was it that glass of wine I had? Was it when I used to smoke? Well, like, what was it? And at that point, they said, look, you've got 2 vials of sperm left. And we wanted genetic siblings for our children, so at least half genetic siblings, and didn't want to change donor. They said, you've got 2 vials left. What do you want to do? And at that point, we said we'd move to IVF because there's a better chance, better success rate, opportunity for embryos, multiple embryos. So at that point, I was like really excited. Let's go. We were going to try a new adventure, fertility adventure from IUI. And we got a call. Lockdowns hit. We're not going to be able to do any form of transfer, but we can collect your eggs. And at that point, I was like, okay, that's fine. You're going to preserve my fertility. Great. And then we got a call the week after. We can't even do the egg collection. That's it. And at that point, obviously,
Had you
very
already
lucky.
started your treatment?
No, it was just before we'd made the decision about moving forward, and we had all these dates and all the schedule ready and about to pick up medication, and then obviously just got told, no, like the world's gone into lockdown. And obviously at that point, no one knew what was happening. So that sense of panic of, oh gosh, you know, what's going to happen? Is my fertility going to hold up? They can't even preserve it. And I think that panicked me more, the fact that they couldn't collect my eggs as opposed to moving on. Because I thought, if they can collect my eggs and preserve my fertility, at least I've got that opportunity later down the line, whatever happens. So we had lockdown, the first lockdown. And it was just, I spent it getting physically, psychologically fit, healthy. You know, during that first lockdown, everyone remembers it was mental hot. It was so hot. So I was out in
Yeah.
the garden getting fit with the kids because there was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And then it came to the end of the first lockdown, and our clinic was the first one to open up. So we got the call and they said, you can come in, but Stacey, my wife, couldn't come in with me. Stacey can't come in with you. She can't come to anything. If you come, you've got to be masked up. You've got to have COVID tests at all of these intervals. And if you
Yeah.
fail and if you catch it, the whole cycle gets cancelled. That's it.
Yeah.
So it was, again, very lucky to have two children already, but a really traumatic time to be like, the world's imploding. This awful pandemic is happening. We want to continue our journey, but like, what do we do? So we went for IVF, and you know, I only got 5 eggs in the end, and they weren't all great quality either. So again, that kind of shock of, wow, my fertility is depleted at such a rate. Um, so then we made a decision with a fresh transfer. So I went for that, and in the heat of the moment, I was like, I just want to put two back, and they went through all the evidence, the risk, and I said, no, I really want to put two back against all my better judgment, and it failed. So they were the two best embryos, and it failed. So this is the fourth attempt now. And then the next attempt, again, the fifth attempt, it was a case that we said, well, we're going to run out of money, but also, you know, the second lockdown was then coming. It was like, oh my gosh, the world's kind of going through a pandemic, like the lockdowns again. And we said, we don't know if we'll be able to do it again. But I had the fifth attempt, had a frozen transfer, and fell pregnant with our third. So I had her kind of during that wave of lockdowns and,
Yeah.
not being able to see family, even when the world opened up. And, I've got pictures of my kids up at the glass at the front of the house, like to my parents, because I said, I'm pregnant now. I can't risk the children getting anything, but I also can't risk because we didn't know what the maternal risk was to
Yeah.
me or baby. So when we locked down hard. We didn't have, some people having parties and being naughty. We didn't do anything. We locked down. And then had her. She's now going to be 4 in June. Um, and the birth was incredibly traumatic. It was really poor care, and I'm still recovering from that 4 years later, physically. But at that point, I said, I don't think I could physically go through that again, even though we do want a big family. We always had 4 in our head. I physically couldn't go through or psychologically go through that trauma that we both went through. And then one day I was working, and she came in, and out of the blue, and just sat down and went, baby number 4. And Tracy, I nearly fell off my chair. I was like, 4? What? And she kind of smiled and she said, how about it? And I said, well, no, I don't. And she went, no, not you, me. And she hadn't really expressed. A couple of times she said, oh, maybe I'll carry again. Never
Yeah.
expressed a care to physically carry again. And I said, yeah, let's go. And we again did all the things. We hired the best
Have you got
nutritionist.
embryos left, or did Stacey do another?
Stacey did her
Egg?
friend. Reciprocal didn't feel right for us. We had a lot of conversations about it. It's a wonderful experience, but for us, we had conversations around giving our eldest another full genetic sibling, and what that
Yeah.
looked like, and the impact for her, and how positive that would be, even though they're all half genetic siblings. So she went for IVF again, being a bit older, higher BMI, severe PCOS. We knew it'd be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Did all the things, and she was just an egg Trojan. She created 24 follicles. It got down to 14. And then
Wow.
we did PGTA testing because of her age and because of the
Yeah.
genetic issues that could have occurred with that. And she had 9 PGTA, like, great genetically tested embryos, 9
Wow.
at the age of 40. Now we know statistically that you get 1 or 2 maybe at 49. So she
So
was
she really is
already.
a
Yeah,
Trojan.
absolutely. And she did really well, and she fell pregnant first time. So our youngest is now 1.5, and yes, we are absolutely done now. 4 is tough but magical. But for us, that 13, 14 years, it seems like a lifetime ago, but going through that multitude of failed cycles and the trauma of in a pandemic and baby loss
Yeah.
and secondary infertility and PCOS, like there's so many boxes that we ended up ticking that we would
Yeah.
have never thought as a female same-sex couple that we'd go through. But yeah, it's been a long journey.
backtracking to when you and Stacey first got together, how soon into the relationship did you start thinking about babies? Was it quite quick? Was it something that took a bit of time?
Well, lesbians, we do this thing called we U-haul. So within a few weeks, we're either moved in or we're like proposing. I
Yeah,
jest, but just as part of the community, we do move fast. But I mean, conversations quite quickly were around if we stayed together, or I wanted to get married. I was a staunch Catholic background,
yeah,
that Catholic guilt about being queer, but also I wanted to be married, and obviously marriage equality wasn't around. You had civil partnerships that came into play, so we had that, and then when marriage equality happened, we just amended the paperwork. But
yeah.
I wanted to be married first. She wasn't that fussed about marriage. She's like, it doesn't bother me either way. But I think over the years we became to be on the same page. But we always had that agreement that children was always on the cards.
And you said really strongly, which was a joy to my ears, just that you were on the same page, that you
Mm,
wanted the security that going into a clinic,
mm.
having the security around choosing your donor
Yeah.
in a regulated system, it gave you that extra bit of security. But had you considered a known donor outside of a clinic, or would you have done that had there been somebody instantly to mind, or that wasn't there for you?
I think home insemination, known donation is a wonderful experience for so many people. And there's so many
Yeah,
people in our community we've supported that
yeah,
have had a great experience. But there
yeah,
is also a dark side to it that can happen. And again, you can't predict that. Intent changes, donor
yeah,
then wants access, relationships break down. It can be really tumultuous, especially for a child at the centre of that, or children. So we did talk about it, but we weren't really aware of the legalities around it back then. But to have someone that we knew didn't feel right, but we also wanted to make sure that, of course, our children had access to that information. And, we've got an open ID disclosure donor anyway, but we wanted one that also accepted contact, because, of course, you have right to information, you don't have right to contact.
yeah,
But
yeah.
he accepted, obviously, right to contact. So when our children reach 18, and we have these discussions now, if they wanted to meet him, they could, and that would be their journey and their experience. But we most definitely felt that the legal route supported us, but also
Yeah.
felt very lucky that we could scrimp and scrape. And by scrimp and scrape, Tracy, I mean we were living on 50 quid a week after bills, after everything. Everything was cancelled. When people go, oh, it's my birthday or it's our wedding, everything was off the table. We just couldn't. Um,
Yeah,
but for us, going down that route gave us that level of protection, but completely appreciated that there are other people that it's not financially viable for,
yeah,
or that route feels right for them. And I don't feel that a known donor for us would have been the right thing to do, but it's still a good experience for others.
absolutely. And where you picked your donor, and you've had the same donor for all of your
Yeah.
children, how did you make that decision? What made your donor stand out? Because it can feel a bit like Amazon.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I always joke that it's like shopping for the most expensive pair of shoes that you've ever that you've ever had, and it is. I mean, when we sat down and we were looking through the banks, and we knew in our heads, we wanted someone that had really strong ethics and family values, that had a really strong sense of family and had good relationships. We wanted someone that was a bit like both of us. So when we looked for our donor, our final donor was very sporty. Like my
Yeah,
wife was incredibly sporty. She played football and lots of other sports, but also quite musical or theatrical. And I used to be a performer and do musical theatre. So he in his family, there were people that played instruments. He played an instrument. He was into theatre and musical as well. So it was kind of that balance between a bit of both of us.
yeah,
And then obviously we wanted someone that kind of, we even have both similar interest in what a beautiful woman looks like. So we both wanted someone that was dark hair. My wife has dark eyes. I have blue eyes. She likes blue eyes. I love brown eyes. I don't like my eyes. So I was like, it'd be really nice if we could have a dark-eyed donor like you.
yeah,
And then we went for someone Hispanic. So he's Puerto Rican. Um, and we found him, and there was a few that we'd found, and I mean, he was beautiful anyway. they always are. But that was lovely as well, not that it's the most important thing, but then we looked at the different things of some of the donors had genetic issues, some of the donors had lots of cancer in their family, or they died really young. So when you get down to the hobbies and the interests and the passions, we wanted to make sure we had someone that was healthy and that gave our future children the best chance of life, genetically. And we got down to these two donors, both amazing and both wonderful people, they felt like. And it came down to the other donor had a lot of cancer in the family, and
Okay.
people had died a little bit younger.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, it felt right. And obviously you have to check for CMV status as well. And he ticked all the boxes. So for us, he was the one that obviously we made the decision to use.
What's beautiful to see, I think there's a thing with being a counsellor, there's a thing with video counselling, but when you're just chatting, if you're not comfortable, it jumps out of the screen like bad acting. And when you talk about your donor, it feels that you're still
Yeah.
pleased to take that one.
Yeah. And sometimes you look back at, like, we've got baby photos. We don't have recordings because back then they didn't do recordings at the banks. But we've got all the information, we've got the folders, we've got the information for the kids when they want to start opening and delving into that. And it's lovely to see, because that you made a good decision, and it's a hard decision. And again, both being on the same page has to happen. And it would have been difficult if we weren't on the same page, but we both sat there and was like, no, he's the one. Like that's the right one for us. And again, it's such an important decision. You're creating your future children. And whilst it does seem a bit not non-authentic, it does seem a bit synthetic in the way that you have to choose them. Unfortunately, if you do need donation of any form, these are the ways that you have to go through. And having as much information for us felt like the right route, because the children have all that information for when they feel they need it.
Oh, which is great to hear. And have you individually or together as a couple or from your children been curious about genetic half siblings? Have you found out how many other half siblings there are in the UK, or from your bank, are you able to be curious and find out more about half siblings?
You can't access the information. Obviously the children can, and obviously with 23andMe liquidating, a lot of sadly donor conceived people and future children like mine aren't going to have that kind of space to do that. There may be other organisations they could do it through, but for us, we haven't. There's a lot of people that do go down that route and have a really positive experience, or negative. We've chosen to make that not our decision. If the children do want to reach out in the future, and we've had conversations, especially with our eldest, about obviously half siblings and what language she wants to use and what she feels comfortable with, and would she reach out. And again, that's not our journey. And I think we felt it right for our family to let them make the decision. If at any point in the future they want to meet him, great. If they want to meet them, great. It's not on us. It's our experience together, but it's not our decision to make for them. So we haven't reached out because we want to let them make that decision when they're old enough to consent properly.
And within the UK, obviously, with part of the HFEA at the moment, you can't reach out, but you can find out the gender in Europe, how many there are within the UK. But it feels your respect for your children's journey is a primary driver. Where you mentioned when we first started talking about questions that other people can ask, when I'm working with couples right at the start, so how do you deal with who's the real mum, and you want to get your virtual gaffer tape out. How have you coped with inappropriate questions, or have there been more or less than you were expecting? What's it been like for you?
I think we were just completely ignorant and unprepared at the beginning. I mean, when we had the first interaction in that kind of negative or discriminatory space, or even if there's not an intent, was the day after she was born, and one of the obstetricians was checking her over, and she said, who are you? Are you Stacey? And I said, no, I'm Laura. And she just looked really confused and looked at the notes. I went, oh, I'm her other mum. To which she kind of glazed over, sneered, looked me up and down, and then turned around and she started getting really rough with the baby. And obviously at the time I didn't know what obstetric checks look like when newborns are first born, but to me they looked really aggressive, and I know now from seeing them 4 times over, it was incredibly aggressive. So she was really being quite rough with the baby, and I'm like, can you not do that? And she went, I don't want her. She kind of put her hand up, she went, I don't want her, get her out, I want the real mum. And at that point I kind of went, and I'd never heard anyone say that. So I was like, hold on. No, and I kind of stumbled over my words. And I'm not short for words, Tracy, normally. But in that situation, I folded and I couldn't get my, and I started crying. And she continued to be rough with the baby and just ignored me. And the nurse just stood there. And I was trying to explain to her, no, I'm the other mum. I am her real mum. I'm going to be on her birth. All of these words were coming out, but not making sense. And then I just started saying, you're being really rough with her. Give me the baby. And she just completely ignored me. And in the end, I got to the point of, give me my baby now, like really loud. And she just didn't even look at me. She passed the baby to the nurse and carried on taking notes. And the nurse gave me at like our eldest and just took me out. And I absolutely just like folded. And I was in a state, and she was like, I'm really sorry. It's her culture. It's where she's from. It's illegal. If you want to complain, you can write to pals. And that was it. So my wife came out from having a shower because she desperately just wanted to get home, hates hospitals. And she was like, oh my God, like what's happened? Thought something was wrong with the baby. And I just couldn't even get the words out. And then after that was the pinnacle moment that I know looking back that I had postnatal depression, but from a partner's perspective, I refused help. My mother-in-law said, I'll come over and stay with you for a week or two and show you what to do. And I went, no, don't need you. I was really abrupt looking back. I wouldn't let people hold her. I coveted her. I would validate myself in every situation. Old people would look in the buggy at the supermarket and say, oh, baby's lovely. And I'd go, I'm like embarrassingly like flag myself, like I'm her mum as well. To which they probably think, oh, okay, like great. And that proceeded for quite some time, and it had a real impact, I'm sure, on my wife. Having to go through that after having a baby and then having to manage my mental health. And I don't think I realised at the time, and it's only now looking back, I realised how bad it was.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where I was consistently having to do it, and it was a lot. It was a lot on her. It impacted probably our bond as a family at that very beginning. But obviously, since then, and since setting the organisation up and sharing that, so many people experience these levels of discrimination or non-ill intent. But we get things now and again. Mostly medical appointments. You know, I had one recently with our youngest who was having her injections, and the nurse said, are you mum? And I said, yeah, I'm a mum. And again, the name. And I said, no, I'm her other mum, kind of explaining it. And she went, oh, are you able to consent to the baby having the injections? And I was kind of like, I'm on a birth certificate. I'm her other mum. It's on her medical records. Yes, I am. And I did query it with the staff, and the surgery apologised and said they were doing training. Again, mistakes happen, but it was again the intent of, oh, I don't even think you can do this. The
Yeah.
training needed to be there, and sometimes that's the problem. But I mean, we do still get things said, like many people in our community. I mean, we were on holiday recently, and again in a foreign country, you're sometimes mindful as a queer couple that you don't want to openly express, but at the same time I was like, well, hold on a second, I don't want to sit here and pretend that we're sisters or friends or kind of
Yeah.
not say anything, because actually when any of our 3 children that can speak, or 4 children, go mummy mummy and call out to one of us or the other of us, well, people are going to know anyway. And I
Yeah.
don't want to not I don't want to pretend that they're not my children in situations. But again, there's a real issue with safety for the queer community, especially at the moment. So
Yeah.
sometimes, depending on where you are, you have to just not say anything. You have to lie, and we have lied in the past in certain countries. But I think now I've got to the point where I'm like, hold on, hang on. I shouldn't have to hide who we are and,
Yeah.
our parentage just to make others feel comfortable or to feel safe. But yeah, it happens a lot.
And most of the places where IVF Life Stories broadcast to are very inclusive.
Mhm.
But every now and again, that stark reminder of just how damn hard it can be is
Mm,
really heartbreaking,
yeah.
and really affirms the strength of you in saying, no, we're not going to stay where it's safe. We still want to push the boundaries and go to where we want to go and have a great time and be real with our kids and make them stronger as a result.
I think as well, what people don't consider, especially queer people, when when you're going through that journey, is when your children are physically here and you're in those situations, having to explain to your 10-year-old child that there are countries that we won't go. So if friends go certain places, or like their friends go certain places, and going, oh, that sounds nice, and I'm like, we can't go there. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because it's not legal to be what me and mummy are, and as a family, and it's not safe for you either. There are countries whereby if we went, we'd be imprisoned, we'd have we'd be hurt, like physically, violently, and we'd have our children taken off us. And to explain that to your children, and then them not understanding, especially Ariel, she's very compassionate. She goes, but why wouldn't you like people like you? Why don't they like you? So then having to really break down homophobia and discrimination, and transphobia, biphobia, all of these different levels of discrimination, alongside the fact that our children are ethnic, they're visibly a different colour to myself and my wife. And I mean, actually, historically, some of my family are black. My nan is from Barbados. So some of my cousins are mixed race. My mum's mixed race. My uncles, some of them are black with afros. So I've got that in my family. So you inherently already are white presenting, but have had to deal with that anyway. But knowing my children now have to deal with, having two mums, and being of different ethnic communities, and also being donor conceived, that's a lot of really big boxes to tick, isn't it?
And affirms the lengths you went to have them, to pick a donor that you felt comfortable with, that was the right decision for you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, and the conversation happens more, and I absolutely understand, a lot of people question, well, why didn't you pick a donor that was, my dad's side was Irish, or, my wife is inherently English, or why didn't you pick a black donor? And to be honest, back then, those conversations weren't happening. If there was more guidance, if there was more support, more information, maybe we would have picked a different donor. But back then, we picked based on what felt right. But for us, he was the right donor.
What jumped out of the screen was that you picked a donor that you felt you could sit down and have a cup of tea with, that had the values. You mentioned the sport, you mentioned the musical, and again, you can't fake the feeling of comfy. If something doesn't sit comfortable, we don't pick it, have a look at it, and it feels you picked a donor who at the time, with the information you had, was the person that you wanted to help you two become the two most amazing parents. And it worked. Bloody marvellous.
Yeah, very lucky.
When you had that really, to me, it sounds abusive experience at the hospital with the birth of your eldest, it feels it really ignited that passion. When did you actually have the energy? Because 4 children feels exhausting to me. But when did you actually have the energy to start campaigning, to start creating the support networks? How did that get off the ground?
I mean, I always have had a big mouth, and I've always felt anyway, but I always felt that there was this desire, an innate fire in addressing social injustice, not just being queer, but being different. And I was really bullied in primary school, and I wasn't very popular in secondary school. And for me, being the outsider consistently, and then now ticking all these other boxes, my mum was a single parent, Catholic, divorced. I was the child that children got told not to play with because her parents were separated. Even you're talking not that long ago, but these are the things that happened, especially in Catholic backgrounds. And I've always had that feeling that if something's not right, you speak up, and it doesn't matter if it's not about you, because one day they'll come for you. It's the same with the situation today with the trans community. You don't speak up for others, soon they'll come for you. And I think at that point where we were having all these very new, very raw experiences, when we were going through that, I'd sit there and go, well, why are the red baby books not got, mother and father / parent too? Well, where is the space that I sit in? where is the space to say that you had fertility treatment, or you have a sperm donor? Where does he sit or they sit? And all these questions, and I would just consistently question things. I mean, when we registered the birth of our eldest, we were the first people in our region, so we were there 3 hours because the registrars, bless them, were running around in a tiz, head spinning, and they were like, "We're really sorry, we don't know how we register you or the baby." And we were like, that's okay. It's a new, it's new to you, and it
Yeah.
was quite comical when we look back. But at the time, that support wasn't given, or training or tools to the professionals,
Yeah.
no understanding of us or education. So these things kept consistently happening. And then we would get people, "Oh, I've got a friend like you." Or we'd be in the supermarket and someone would be like, "Oh, who's babe?" "Oh, we're both mums." And, "Oh, my daughter's gay. How did you have? Can I ask you how you had?" And all these questions were coming out in these different spaces, the workplace, social media. And in the end, Tracy, it got so frequent, it was weekly, that we were being contacted about how we had the kids. And I was breastfeeding our second child, sat on the sofa. I think he was like a week or two old. And I just sat there and I was like, "I'm going to do it." And she, as usual, she was like, "Oh God, do what?" And I was like, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to set up something for people, for mums like us, or people like us who want to or have a family, because it's crap. There's
Yeah.
no space for people like us." So I started socials, and within 6 months, we had support groups. We were in Parliament, and we were
Yeah.
doing campaigns with Stonewall at the time, and it kind of was at the right place, right time. It imploded, and I just wanted to create a space, a safe space for women and people like us to go, "Where do I go that's inclusive? Where do I go that's safe? What's the
Yeah.
guidance?" And it evolved to not just be like a community and support groups and events. It evolved to working with experts. We've got no clinical expertise, it's lived and
Yeah.
living experience. So we wanted to work with the best of the best, so that people could access that for free and know that they were getting the best guidance to make an informed decision, which is so
Yeah.
important, Tracy. And so we wanted to evolve that so people could come together and celebrate, more than anything, celebrate and usualize, as Sue Sanders says, usualize queer families, and
Yeah.
celebrate them, and celebrate our children and what those journeys look like. But also, I think, celebrate the good times, but also talk really openly about the difficult times. The being the non-bio mum or the non-gestational mother or parent, and the difficult discriminations you could go through. Because I really wish, looking back, that we'd had someone to tell us.
Yeah.
Someone could say this, or this could happen, or this is the route you could go down. We didn't have that support. So I just wanted to create that space where people could come together, celebrate, and support each other to be really informed and meet others like them. Our first event, my eldest was only tiny, and she ran up to me and she was so excited. She's like, "Mummy, mummy, mummy." And I'm like, "What?" And she was like, "Guess what?" And I'm like, "What?" And she said, "I just met this girl and she's my friend and she has two mums. She's just like me." And it was that kind of, this is why we do it, because it's not
Yeah.
just our journeys, it's our children's. Our
Yeah.
children are part of that pathway, and they may be queer, we don't know if they're going to go on that journey too. But to create that space and know that you've helped people, I wanted to help people and make sure that those spaces were easy to navigate and you didn't feel that you didn't have the information to make that decision.
Did you have counselling ahead of your treatment?
We did. We had 2 sessions, and to be
Okay.
honest, I'll always say, Tracy, that I don't even remember half the stuff that we spoke about.
Okay.
And I think we were so excited in that moment.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we generally saw it, and we always say quite publicly, do not see it as a tick box.
Oh
See it
God,
as the
no.
best money or the best hours that you'll spend before you start. And we didn't. We were like, "Oh my gosh, so excited." Didn't consider, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, it'll be fine, yeah, yeah," that kind of thing. Did not consider any of the ramifications, any of the risks, any of the difficulties that we would go through.
Yeah.
Because again, no one told us implications counselling is so important. And if you need it throughout, do it, because it's so crucial. We
No,
didn't. We just ticked a box.
I hear that. I was just thinking back to 2010. There used to be the most amazing LGBT play group at the South Bank, where they'd meet at the can't even remember the name of the I live in
Centre.
Wales, yeah, but they used to put a teddy on the table so that if you were there and you wanted to speak to other same-sex couples who were planning a family, you'd find the table with the teddy on the table. On Saturday morning, there must have been 8 tables with a teddy on the table. Nobody knew where to go. It was, again, it was all quite hush-hush and secretive. So it was so exciting when you launched to be able to advise people that there was this actual website or group. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Instagram was far off at that point.
Yeah.
But again, it is so exciting. And what was really beautiful, I think it was 2020 when you joined with Tommy's. Have I got the year right? And just raising awareness of loss within couples as well, and all your work within birth trauma. But it feels you've really holistically acknowledged a need for enhanced care for individuals.
Yeah, I think again, there's so many spaces that we don't have a voice. There's so many spaces that we're not even not with ill intent, we're not considered. So it's only when you address them, and I'm in sales, I've got a background in sales. I will knock on any door. I'm tenacious. I will knock on the door until you open it, and I will get a seat at that table, and I'll eat at it. Because I think it's really important that when you're considering any level of care or service, that you consider everyone that's going to access it. And so speaking with Tommy's and reaching out and saying, you do really well. They absolutely have always really been passionate about inclusivity, but saying, are you aware that there's lots of areas that you need support with, and can we partner and can we work together to improve that? And looking at that non-biological or non-gestational parents' view of loss, because until then, I don't think anyone had publicly spoke about it. And I said, it's awful when you're physically not going through it, but psychologically losing a baby and having to support someone knowing that there's nothing you can do. Like any man or person that goes through it in a heterosexual relationship. I think those partnerships are really important to evolve and develop to make sure that queer people are visible, are represented, their experiences are heard. And it's not just about ticking a box, it's that human side of this is what loss or this is what this experience is like. But look down the road at the ramifications, the implications that it has on the workplace, their relationships, their daily life, like all other aspects and all other parts of their network. If we don't get it right, it cannot just cost them physically and psychologically, it costs the economy. Doing good things, supporting everyone who needs your care is the right thing to do humanly anyway.
And just acknowledging the gap between your littlies, have you noticed change when Stacey had your youngest? Was it noticeably better? Have things improved?
I'd really like to be positive and say it's massively improved, but it hasn't. I mean, the same things that were happening 10, 12, 13, 14 years ago are still happening now. We do a lot of education and training for midwives and healthcare professionals and in charities. And to be honest, the same lack of understanding is there. Sometimes the same level of discrimination is still there. And it always will be, Tracey. It'll always still be there. There'll still be those pockets of lack of want and desire to include everyone, but that is something that's why we campaign and we fight for that change, because if we're not going to do it, who's going to do it? And that's why we think collaboration and working as a team with others is really important. I'm not trans, I'm not non-binary, I can't speak up for everyone. I can speak with people, but I can uplift others, because who am I to speak for every other type of demographic of person? I'm not, but I can carry them along with me. I can get that door open and we can all sit together, because I think it's really important that you work collaboratively with organisations and people and campaigns, because if you don't, what's the point in fighting against each other for the same goal? We might as well collectively be a bit louder.
I think when you're so passionate and a campaign is active, there's almost a bit like implications counselling. You've ticked a box and that's sorted. But to hear it really raises awareness of the need for almost a mission statement and a value message to make it that bit more inclusive. And it feels actually that's where you're going, is the needs a general culture change that starts much younger. I sadly made a note, and I think is it Proud Foundations is your education arm, as well, and having that education arm that's there just to promote that message just feels so important. How important has that been to you, and how is that growing?
I think it just evolved again, just out of a need. And to be honest, we've never really overly marketed any of the services because there's been a need for it. There's been a desire from NHS trusts at a localised or national level. There's been, conversations with government, within Parliament consistently, that will bring us into those conversations, which is great. Again, still knocking on that door. And there are spaces that don't want us there. There are spaces that will fight against inclusion. But it's been really important because if you are a healthcare professional, or if you're in any kind of profession, and you're not given the training and the tools to understand and appreciate someone's experience journey and who they are inherently as a human, and they come to you, that care could be misinterpreted, it could be wrong, it could be medically really dangerous, it could have huge implications. But if you have the training and the tools to know the type of people and demographic of people that you meet, what great care you're giving, what a great job you're doing, but you're also being supported in your role. And I think that's where the government, or any government, fall flat. Because if you invest in training and education of all marginalised, all communities, how beautiful, how good could the level of care be? And, look at Sweden, look at Switzerland, look at these countries that if you look at them, they're full of empathy. They're full of, they've got great paternity leave, great maternity leave, great pensions. They look after their people. If you invest in people, they'll invest in you. They'll support you. So I think education is really important. But I think as well, there's a huge piece around education in schools. We've got to get in early, this whole fear of Section 28 coming, and books. I read an article yesterday that LGBTQIA plus books are being removed from libraries at the moment. Again, we're going back into Section 28, we're going back in time. And, when my daughter questions, at her old school, she's like, there's no books about people like me. At her new school, because we moved last year, she's like, there's loads of books about children like me. That kind of inclusion, that fear of, oh, it's not just, I'm not just different all the time. I'm actually talked about, and I'm visible. And I think education does start in the home, but there's a lot of learnt behaviour that from home and school that creates people and creates their behaviour and their views and their culture. And if you don't nip it in the bud at that age, you're creating homophobes, you're creating racists, you're creating ableists. Let's educate them young. And it's not about talking about, for example, with the queer community, you're not talking about sex, you're not talking about something graphic, you're talking about different people and who they love and who they are. That's it. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done in the workplace, whatever you do, but also starting it young and talking about fertility, talking about it young, talking about the different way babies are made. It's really important.
We have just got a couple of minutes, but if there is a young same-sex couple watching this now thinking, oh, when we're ready to have a baby, where do we look? What do we go? What's your advice?
They can absolutely come to us. I mean, we have our private support groups, we have our global community, they can come to us for guidance. But again, there's lots of different spaces. Make sure that you look at all of the pathways, look at the legal implications of all pathways. It's really important, and take your time. Even if you feel you don't have time, make sure you make a really clever, informed decision that's right for both or all of you, and that you're all on the same page. But legal implications, who can be on the birth certificate, what can happen if intent changes, how much does it cost? All of the important things, cover that first before you jump. Because I think that's really important. And talk about the difficult stuff. If you're struggling and go, oh, I'm really struggling with this, oh, I'm really fearful. I think it's that journey that you have to talk about really openly, because if you don't, and sadly, we see a lot of people that don't talk about it openly and come to us privately. You've got to talk about it, because if you don't, that will fester and it will have an implication. But yeah, making that informed decision and choosing the right place is right. But make sure you access as much information as possible.
Oh, that's such great advice. Laura-Rose, you have been an absolute treasure.
Thank
you so much for coming along this evening. It's been great to see you. Thankfully, Caroline has shared on the socials all of your links to your social media, so it's quite easy for people to find you. But do contact Laura-Rose if you've got questions or want advice or information. Her resources are fabulous. One thing when thinking just about legal guidance, lots of people cross countries for overseas treatment. Make sure you've checked the legal advice both in your own country and wherever you're going for treatment. But look forward to seeing everybody next month. And Laura-Rose, thank you again. You've been an absolute star.
Thank you for having me. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Take care so much. Thank you.